Imagine a city so wealthy its streets were lined with gold, and so intellectually vast that it held the collective knowledge of the known world. Now, imagine a black tide of horsemen appearing on the horizon, not to conquer, but to erase. In 1258, the Tigris River reportedly ran black with the ink of 1,000,000 books, and red with the blood of a civilization. This is the moment the world's light went out. Section 1. The Jewel of the World. To understand the magnitude of what was lost, we must first understand what Baghdad was. In the mid-13th century, Baghdad was not merely a capital, it was the center of the human universe. It was the city of peace, a circular marvel of architecture that functioned as the beating heart of the Islamic Golden Age. While Europe was fractured and struggling through its own dark ages, Baghdad was a sprawling metropolis of over 1,000,000 souls, a place where the air was thick with the scent of spices from the Far East and the sound of a dozen languages echoing in the markets. But beneath this splendor, was there a false sense of permanence? Do we ever truly recognize the peak of a civilization until it begins to fall? For 500 years, the Abbasid dynasty had cultivated a garden of intellect. An institution that didn't just preserve the philosophy of the Greeks and the mathematics of the Indians, it evolved them. Imagine walking through the streets and passing hospitals that treated the poor for free, or astronomical observatories where the stars were mapped with a precision that would take centuries for the West to replicate. It was a world of paper mills, complex banking systems, and a middle class that valued poetry as much as profit. This was a society that believed knowledge was the ultimate currency. The Caliphate had survived centuries of internal strife and external crusades, leading to a dangerous assumption that Baghdad was divinely protected, an eternal city that could never truly break. Its wealth was legendary, its walls were high, and its libraries were the archives of humanity. But wealth and wisdom are often the very things that attract the predator. While the scholars of Baghdad were debating the nature of the soul and the movement of the planets, a shadow was stretching across the Silk Road. A power had risen in the East that cared little for the nuances of philosophy, a power that viewed a city's walls not as a defense, but as a challenge. As we look back at the vibrant, bustling streets of the 1258 Caliphate, we have to ask, at what point does a civilization's success become its greatest vulnerability? When does the refinement of culture turn into a fatal detachment from reality? The citizens of Baghdad believed they were at the center of the world, safe behind their history and their god. They did not yet realize that the horsemen who would dismantle their world were already gathering their strength, fueled by a mandate that recognized no borders and felt no pity. The golden sun was setting, and the horizon was beginning to darken. Section 2. The Unstoppable Storm. While Baghdad basked in its own sophistication, a force was gathering in the east that the world had never seen, and it was moving with a singular, terrifying purpose. This was the Mongol Empire, not a disorganized horde of raiders, but the most sophisticated military machine on the planet, led by Hulagu Khan, the grandson of Genghis. This army was a manifestation of pure kinetic energy. These were people born in the saddle, capable of traveling 60 miles a day, fueled by a belief that the eternal blue sky had decreed they should rule everything between the horizons. Have you ever wondered what happens when an immovable culture of tradition meets an unstoppable force of total war? Hulag's mission was explicit. He was to bring the Abbasid Caliphate into the Mongol fold, or he was to erase it. This was not a mere conquest. It was a systematic expansion. He didn't just bring horsemen. He brought a multinational coalition of engineers, siege experts from China, and conscripted soldiers from every land the Mongols had already broken. They moved like a glacier, slow, cold, and crushing everything in their path. The Mongols were masters of psychological warfare, often sending envoys ahead to offer a simple choice: total submission or total annihilation. There was no third option. The storm didn't arrive all at once. It was a series of tremors that shook the foundations of the Islamic world. First, the mountain fortresses of the Hashashanda, legendary as Hassans, fell, proving that even the most impenetrable mountain hideouts could be cracked by Mongol ingenuity and persistence. As these unbeatable strongholds crumbled, a chilling realization should have swept through the streets of Baghdad. The Mongols were not interested in the usual rules of engagement or the chivalry of the Middle Ages. They practiced a form of total war that sought to dismantle the very infrastructure of an enemy's society. As the dust clouds from 100,000 hooves began to rise on the eastern horizon, The Mongols were coming with Chinese gunpowder, Persian logistics, and a nomadic ruthlessness that viewed cities merely as pens for sheep to be slaughtered. Could a city built on the foundations of logic and law survive an encounter with a force that viewed the world as a giant hunting ground? The storm was no longer a rumor. It was a physical presence, and the gates of the Golden Age were about to be tested. Section 3. The arrogance of the Caliph. At the center of this gathering storm sat Caliph Mustasimbila, a man who held the most prestigious title in the Islamic world, but possessed little of the iron required to defend it. As Hulagu Khan's messengers arrived at the gates of Baghdad, they carried a demand that was as blunt as a warhammer. Come out, dismantle your walls, and submit, or prepare for a fate that the world would never forget. But how does a leader respond when they have been told for a lifetime that their authority is divinely ordained? The Caliph didn't respond with military mobilization or diplomatic brilliance. He responded with an insult. Al-Mustasim believed in the myth of Baghdad's invincibility. He sent word back to Hulagu, warning the Mongol prince that the entire Muslim world would rise up in a holy fervor if the city of peace were touched. He spoke of millions of warriors who would surge from the deserts to crush the Mongols. But these were ghosts, the empty boasts of a dynasty that had neglected its army for decades. While the Caliph sat in his palace, surrounded by poets and advisors who told him what he wanted to hear, his Grand Vizier and his generals were divided by petty jealousies and sectarian rot. The tragedy of the Caliph's arrogance was his refusal to prepare. When his advisors suggested he should at least repair the city walls or recruit mercenaries from the northern frontiers, he reportedly dismissed them, believing that the Mongols would eventually be paid off or simply go away. He was a man trapped in a bubble of tradition, unable to comprehend a world that had moved beyond the old rules of caliphal prestige. He treated the most dangerous military force in human history as if they were just another group of unruly nomads who could be managed with a few choice words and a display of royal disdain. Hulagu, however, was not a man of words. He viewed the Caliph's reply not as a holy warning, but as a signature on a death warrant. The Mongols valued one thing above all: absolute loyalty or absolute clarity. By refusing to submit and failing to prepare for war, Al-Mustasim had chosen a path that led directly to catastrophe. As the Caliph continued his daily routines within the city, the horizon began to glow at night, not with the lights of a festival, but with the campfires of an army that stretched further than the eye could see. The time for talk was over, and the price of arrogance was about to be collected in blood. Section 4. The circle closes. By January 1258, the time for posturing had vanished. The Mongol war machine had arrived, and it did something that terrified the inhabitants of Baghdad. It didn't just attack, it surrounded. Hulagu Khan's forces operated with a mathematical precision that defied the chaos of medieval warfare. He divided his massive army into two wings, crossing the Tigris to trap the city from both the east and the west. Baghdad, the circular city designed to be the center of the world, was now the center of a noose. Have you ever felt the claustrophobia of a situation where every exit is systematically erased? The Caliph's army, realizing far too late that the threat was existential, finally rode out to meet the Mongols. It was a massacre. The Mongols, masters of the tactical retreat, lured the Abbasid cavalry into the lowlands and then broke the dikes of the Tigris. The very river that had breathed life into the city for centuries was now weaponized against its defenders, turning the battlefield into a swamp of mud and drowning horses. Those who weren't swallowed by the water were cut down by Mongol arrows. The elite guard of the Caliphate was decimated in a single afternoon, and the survivors fled back behind the city walls, watching as the Mongols began to construct a palisade and a ditch around the entire perimeter. This was the investment of Baghdad. The Mongols didn't just wait for the city to starve. Thousands of captives were forced to build siege engines, while palm trees were hacked down to provide the ammunition for catapults. Chinese engineers, the greatest ballistics experts of the age, began assembling trebuchets that could hurl massive stones and pots of Greek fire with terrifying accuracy. The people inside Baghdad, who had spent their lives in a world of philosophy and trade, were now listening to the rhythmic thud of boulders shattering their ramparts. As the walls began to crack, the psychological collapse followed. The Caliph, finally grasping the reality of his situation, tried to negotiate. He sent out his officials with gold and promises of tribute, the very things he had refused to offer just weeks before. but Hulagu's response was a chilling silence. In the Mongol code, once the siege engines were built and the first stone was thrown, the window for mercy was closed. The circle had been completed, the noose was tightening, and for the first time in 500 years, the citizens of Baghdad realized that their God, their walls, and their history might not be enough to save them. Section 5. The 7 Days of Terror. On February 10, 1258, the silence of the siege was shattered by a sound that would echo through history. The eastern walls of Baghdad, weakened by weeks of relentless bombardment, finally gave way. Through the breach surged a force that saw the city not as a sanctuary of culture, but as a harvest. For 7 days, one of the greatest centers of human achievement was transformed into a slaughterhouse. Have you ever considered how quickly 5 centuries of progress can be unraveled when the thin veil of order is torn away? The Mongols moved from district to district with a terrifying, cold efficiency. This wasn't the chaotic looting of a typical medieval army. This was the methodical dismantling of a population. Men, women, and children were herded into the streets and executed. The grand palaces, whose marble halls had hosted the world's most brilliant minds, were stripped of their riches and then set ablaze. The air, once perfumed with the scents of the Silk Road, became thick with the copper tints of blood and the suffocating smoke of a burning civilization. As the massacre reached its peak, the Caliph al-Mustasim was forced to watch. He was captured and brought before Hulagu, forced to witness the destruction of his family and the systematic plundering of his treasury. There is a haunting legend that Hulagu, disgusted by the Caliph's failure to use his wealth to defend his people, locked him in a room full of gold and jewels, telling him to eat his treasures if he loved them so much. Whether true or not, it speaks to the fundamental clash of values. A ruler who hoarded gold versus a conqueror who weaponized iron. By the end of the week, the screaming had mostly stopped, replaced by the roar of flames. The city's complex irrigation systems, the lifeblood of Mesopotamia since the dawn of time, were smashed. The sophisticated social fabric that had held the diverse population together was shredded. Baghdad was no longer a city, it was a ruin. But as the physical body of the city died, the Mongols turned their attention to something even more precious than gold or life. They turned toward the libraries. The physical slaughter was nearly complete, but the intellectual execution was only just beginning. Section 6. The River of Ink and Blood. If the slaughter of the people was a tragedy of the flesh, what happened next was a tragedy of the human spirit. The Mongols reached the House of Wisdom, the Beit al-Hikmah, for half a millennium. This had been the world's greatest repository of thought, a place where the works of Aristotle, Euclid, and Al-Khwarizmi lived in hand-copied manuscripts. But to the conquerors, these were not treasures of the mind. They were fuel for destruction. What is a civilization if its memory is deleted? What happens to the future when the past is burned before your eyes? Eyewitness accounts from that week describe a scene that seems almost apocalyptic. The Mongols began hauling hundreds of thousands of volumes from the libraries and throwing them into the Tigris River. There were so many books that they formed a physical bridge across the water, allowing horses to cross. But it is the color of the water that haunts our history books. It is said that the Tigris ran black not with silt, but with the ink bleeding from the pages of 1,000,000 destroyed works. Science, philosophy, poetry, and history dissolved into the current. In a few days, the collective genius of centuries was literally washed away. This was more than just the loss of paper. It was the loss of the golden thread that connected the ancient world to the modern one. Consider the breakthroughs in medicine, the lost secrets of early chemistry, and the astronomical charts that might have accelerated the Renaissance by hundreds of years. All of it disappeared into the dark water. The ink of the scholars met the blood of the citizens in a grim, swirling mixture. The Mongols were not just killing people, they were killing ideas. They were ensuring that the Abbasid world could never truly rise again because its foundation of knowledge had been erased. As the last of the great libraries crumbled into ash and the river carried the black ink toward the sea, the Caliph met his end. In a final act of ritualistic execution, he was reportedly wrapped in a rug and trampled to death by Mongol horses, so as not to spill royal blood upon the earth. With him died the institution of the Caliphate that had stood for half a millennium. The silence that fell over Baghdad was not just the silence of a defeated city, but the silence of an era. The world's greatest light had been extinguished, and as the Mongols began to pack their tents and move on, they left behind a landscape that had forgotten how to speak. Section 7. The Silence of the Golden Age. The smoke eventually cleared over the ruins of Mesopotamia, but the world that emerged from the haze was fundamentally different. The fall of Baghdad was not just the end of a siege. The irrigation canals that had made the desert bloom since the time of the Sumerians were broken beyond repair, turning the once fertile heart of the world into a salt-crusted wasteland. The population was so decimated that it would take centuries for the region to recover its numbers. But the deepest scar was the one left on the collective psyche of the East. How do you find the will to innovate when the greatest achievement of your ancestors has been leveled to the ground? History often looks at the Golden Age as a distinct era that ended on a specific day in 1258, but the reality is more haunting. As the light went out in the East, the flickering candles of the European Renaissance began to burn brighter, often fueled by the few manuscripts that had been smuggled out of the city before the gates closed. We must ask ourselves, how much of our modern world is built on the fragments that survived that Black River? How much further along would we be if those million books had never met the Tigris? The Mongol conquest eventually settled into the Pax Mongolica, a period of trade and stability that linked East and West. But the intellectual soul of Baghdad was gone. The city would eventually be rebuilt, but it would never again be the jewel of the world. It became a provincial outpost, a shadow of a memory. The fall of Baghdad serves as a permanent warning to every civilization that believes itself too advanced to fail, or too wealthy to be touched. It reminds us that culture is a fragile thing, held together by the thin threads of education, infrastructure, and the willingness to defend the truth. As we look back at the black ink and the red blood of 1258, the lesson remains clear. A civilization's greatness is not measured by its gold, but by its capacity to preserve and pass on its wisdom. Baghdad fell because it stopped looking outward, because it mistook its past for its future, and because it underestimated a world that was changing around it. The Golden Age ended in fire and silence, leaving us with a question that echoes through every age. If our own world were to face its unstoppable storm tomorrow, what of our knowledge, our art, and our soul would survive the river? Section 8. The Echo of the Fallen. The story of Baghdad is more than a historical tragedy. It is a mirror held up to our own modern world. It forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth that no amount of progress, no depth of knowledge, and no level of economic prosperity can guarantee a civilization's survival if it loses its sense of reality. The ruins of the House of Wisdom are a testament to the fact that what takes 500 years to build can be dismantled in 7 days. We live in an age of digital libraries and global networks, yet the lesson of 1258 remains. Our Golden Age is only as strong as our collective will to protect the foundations of our society. If the ink of Baghdad had never run into the Tigris, where would we be today? Would we have reached the stars centuries earlier, or solved the mysteries of medicine long before the modern era? We will never know the contents of the books that turned the river black, but we can honor their loss by valuing the knowledge we hold now. History isn't just a list of dates and battles. It is a survival manual written in the blood of those who came before us. By understanding the fall of the jewel of the world, we learn how to keep our own light from flickering out. If this journey through the end of the Golden Age sparked a new perspective on history for you, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to join our community of thinkers and explorers. We dive deep into the moments that shaped our world so that we can better understand where we are going. Now, I want to hear from you. In our digital age, where information feels permanent, do you think a river of ink moment could ever happen again? Could our collective knowledge be erased as easily as the libraries of Baghdad? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's keep the conversation going. Thank you for watching, and remember, history is only silent if we stop listening.